Hello everyone. Today I'm going to demonstrate a 20-mark OCR A-level exam question on attempt crimes, which is often an area that students sometimes neglect. I don't know why. Perhaps they think it's not a proper crime and therefore doesn't deserve too much attention. Perhaps they think it's just some bolt-on topic at the end of the syllabus that rarely comes up in the exam, which actually isn't the case. It is often a 20-mark standalone exam question in the A-level exam. And some students just find it a little bit quirky or difficult. So hopefully we can demonstrate that it can be quite a nice question to attempt, pardon the pun, and not too difficult. And you don't have to learn too much, like in some of the bigger topics, to be able to do a 20-mark answer. So in front of us, we've got a problem question from OCR. It was the 2022 paper, this one. And the first thing to notice about attempt questions is it's not about the crime that they're attempting to do. I mean, in this particular example, it's an attempted theft question. And too many students spend time, when you don't really need to spend any time, discussing the crime of theft, because that's not what the question is. It's not a theft question, it's an attempt question. So whatever the crime is that they're attempting, you don't really want to spend any time discussing that crime. And that can be the first mistake, because sometimes students will spend half their answer discussing the actual crime that they're attempting rather than the attempt of it. So that's the first important thing to learn. Whatever crime it is they're attempting, you just want to stick to the rules of attempt. So in front of us, we've got this scenario where Anika is potentially doing 3 attempt crimes. She's attempting 3 crimes. And the first thing I've done, I've just sort of color-coded the 3 different scenarios to make it clear as to which one we're referring to. So the question is whether she's criminally liable for the crime of attempted theft. Now, they've actually named the crime that she's attempting here. They don't always do that. They might just say, discuss whether she's liable for attempt crimes, in which case, when you do spot what crimes it is that she's attempting, you could just name them, and I wouldn't really do much more than that unless there's any particular reason to do so. But even in this case, as OCR often do, they've actually named the crime as well. So I'm going to demonstrate a couple of different ways of approaching a problem question first, because the first thing you must realize is that you've got 20 marks to earn, and 8 marks on the OCR syllabus comes from the AO1. So that's just demonstrating your knowledge of the law. That is in essence doing a mini essay on the law in question. And you get up to 8 marks for doing that. And then the AO2 is how you apply that law to the scenario that you're given. And that carries 12 marks, generally because that's a bit harder to do. Might not be much more writing, it might actually be less writing, but because it's a bit trickier, you get more credit for being able to apply the law. So you must have that in mind as you are preparing and writing your answer, that you want to grab as many of both categories of marks as you can. Now, there's generally 2 ways to do this, and the references I give here are my own. I'm not sure you'll find anybody else calling it this, and OCR use phrases like the horizontal approach and the vertical approach, but I tend to call the first approach the 50-50 approach. I mean, don't pay too much attention to the actual numbers, but what I mean by this is that one way of doing a 20-mark problem question is to just begin doing the first part of the answer, half the answer if you like, thereabouts, and just blast off all the AO1 and do a mini essay on the law and just deal with a lot. Whatever topic it is, whatever crime it is, whatever question it is, just do a mini essay on that topic area the relevant law that you've learned. If it's a very big topic area, I mean, theft might be an example, not attempt theft, but theft in itself. If it was a theft question, there's a lot of AO1 there, so for 8 marks, rather than write everything you know in a really big topic, I would tend to focus on the topic area that you are going to need for your AO2. So you might limit it to some extent to that. If it's a smaller topic area, like attempt crimes, you might try and show knowledge of the lot, because there isn't that much to it. And then I call it the 50-50 approach, because the other half of your answer is then going to be, after you've delivered all the AO1, just underneath, applying the scenario to that law. So you end up with sort of two halves, two answers, the AO1 bit followed by the AO2. And that's what we're going to do on this example. The alternative is what I call the bit-by-bit approach, where you might take the law, and you must always begin with some AO1. So you say the first bit of the AO1. So again, you might have some knowledge of theft as a crime. Your first thing that you might say is to quote the act and the first bit of the act. So you might look at the actus reus element of appropriation. You might look at the first actus reus element, of appropriation, yes. And then while you're at it, say that little bit of law that you know about appropriation, and straight away, bit by bit, apply the law to that bit of law and say, well, these are the rules of appropriation, and in this case I think the defendant has appropriated because, and then you do your application. And then you might move on and do the next bit of law back to AO1 and talk about the rules in theft of property, section 4, and there's not much to say, but you might explain a little bit about the law of property within theft, and then while you're at it, apply it to the scenario and say, well, the property in this case is X. And then, of course, you move on and do the next bit of law, which would be whether it belongs to another and what are the legal principles there, and then apply it while you're on. And many students find that easy to do, and I tend to follow that approach myself in many cases. So you've got a choice. You can either do this 50-50 approach where you do all the AO1 followed by all the AO2 in 2 blocks, or you do it bit by bit. Personally, when a question is like the one we're seeing now, where you've actually got just one single crime, but it's 3 times. Anika is potentially doing 3 attempt crimes. You might get a question where the defendant is doing 2 or 3 thefts, or 2 or 3 burglaries or robberies or whatever. I think in that situation, the 50-50 approach works quite well, because if you just reel off all the AO1 first in one big block, what you're then going to do for the AO2 is apply that AO1 3 times, 3 cycles of application, and that then becomes quite clear and easy for students to do, because they don't have to repeat any AO1, because it's the same crime. It's just the same crime 3 times. You sometimes get that in the situation we're looking at now, where you've got the same defendant doing or attempting the same crime 2 or 3 times. Sometimes you get a problem question where it's the same crime, but it's being done by 2 or 3 defendants. So it's quite easy to just, if you're only dealing with one crime, just reel off all that AO1 and then recycle the AO2 in relation to it. Because what you don't want to do, whichever approach you're using, is keep repeating the AO1 for each new defendant or each new attempt at that crime, because you're not going to get the AO1 marks again by saying it twice or saying it a 3rd time. So one tactic is just to reel it all off and then just apply to it. So because of that, for that reason, I'm going to do this answer. using the 50-50 approach, where we state the AO1 first and then we just apply to it. So I'm just going to walk you through this one as to how you might attempt such a question. So we've got Anika here who wants to buy a particular painting from Nina, and it's too expensive, so she decides to steal it from Nina's art gallery. So the first occasion is this yellow stuff up the top here. She walks over to the painting, she leans across, puts her hands on the frame, getting ready to lift it off the wall, and then Nina sees her and shouts, "Please don't touch," and she leaves empty-handed. And that's your first bit, and then she goes on to try again and again. So as the topic area is attempt crimes, the first thing you need to do is get some AO1 as to what the crime, what an attempt crime actually is. So here we go, and I use colour codes when I do demonstration answers for students, and I always colour my AO1 in yellow, so the students get used to seeing that if it's some AO1 in if it's some yellow writing, then it must be some AO1. And there on the screen is the first thing you could say. Whatever the crime, always start by quoting the relevant law. If it's statute, then quote the act. If you're doing a theft question, you're going to quote Section 1 of the Theft Act, and if you're doing robbery, you're going to quote Section 8 of the Theft Act, and so on. So there's your first bit of AO1. Just define what the act says, and then you go on and just start digging a bit deeper. What else can you say about attempt crimes? Well, you could say that they're inchoate offences, partial and incomplete offences, and they only apply to indictable or triable either way. You might throw a little comment like that in just to show a bit more knowledge, and then pretty quick you want to quote the actus reus. So there we go. It's an act more than merely preparatory to the offence. That's what the act says. So again, if your knowledge is very limited, you might have to stop there. You're not going to get many marks for AO1 if you do, but it's all relevant. So ideally, you'll then go on to explain what the law means by this definition. And already we can throw in a case, that Boyle and Boyle case, where they were guilty of attempted burglary when they didn't actually get into the house, but they got there and forced the lock, and then were arrested. And they said, "Oh, we haven't done burglary." And they said, "Well, no, but you've attempted it because you've done an act more than in preparation," and they were guilty. And then you'll get credit for that, and you might go on and do a however, and say, well, here's another case that looks a bit similar, but this guy was not guilty, and that's that Campbell case where he went to a post office with a imitation gun and a threatening note, and you might think, well, that looks like attempted robbery, but as he wasn't quite at the place, he was just sort of loitering outside. They said, well, that's not attempt because he hasn't gone far enough into committing this offence. So again, just show some knowledge, and then you could even throw another case or two in, but I'm now moving on to the mens rea and saying what that is. It's intent to commit the offence that they are attempting to commit. So we're losing a bit of the text here. I think you probably could sort of fill in what to do here. You can explain the principles of conditional intent, where they actually want to do a crime, but only on the condition that there's something, for instance, worth stealing, as in Eason. We've got a couple more cases in there that we can throw in, and then there's also the principle of impossibility, which is linked to the mens rea, and you could explain that with some more cases. So there is an example of what you might say for your AO1. I can see that my ugly mug is imposing itself on some of that text, but I'm sure you could decide what to say, as you could with most of it. I mean, don't worry too much about my extreme paragraphing here. I'm just trying to detail what you can do for each sentence. But on paragraphing, they do try and paragraph reasonably well, because sometimes students just present this entire block of writing, and it's very difficult for the examiner to sort of distinguish the difference and the different elements in what they're saying. So there's a perfectly reasonable AO1 for attempt crimes. It's a summary, if you like, of the offence. And then we can then go on to have a look at some AO2, because what we now need to do is start applying this law to the scenario. So I'm now looking at it's in green, by the way. I tend to use green for AO2, so the student recognises that, oh, we're into AO2 now. We're now applying the law. So we've explained the law, and now I'm looking at this top bit here, which I've coloured in yellow. But so her first attempt is where she grabs this painting off the wall, puts her hands on the frame, almost lifts it off the wall, but then gets stopped. So I demonstrate I'm referring to that particular incident, and my first comment is that this may achieve the actus reus, because she needs to do an act that is more than preparatory. And quite often with attempt questions is they give you one that sort of sits a little bit in the middle, so it allows you to discuss the options. So the question here is, has she attempted to steal this painting by simply grabbing it? Not getting quite beyond that. So what you can do then is just point out the problem and say, well, the law would have to look at this, and the law would have to decide whether it's mere preparation, merely preparatory, or more than. And we can then link it to those two cases we mentioned in the AO1. Boyle and Boyle had sort of done more than the preparation, hadn't they? And Campbell hadn't quite. So you often get a scenario that sits in between two established cases, and you can just show that you've recognised that. But for me, this looks a bit more like Boyle and Boyle, because Nina in this case has actually grabbed it. She's about to lift it off the wall. It's only because she gets stopped that she doesn't. And there's that Galifa case where they said it's attempt if they have, quote, embarked on the crime proper. So has Anika here embarked, begun, started on doing a theft? And the answer is very probably. She only stops when she gets challenged. So you could make a comment like that. And then don't forget the mens rea bit. Well, it looks like she intends to steal. It looks like she intends to do theft. You need the mens rea of the crime that you're attempting. So here the mens rea is intent to steal, intent to do theft. And let's face it, her act is so deliberate, you could imply the Mohan definition, again, quote another case, to say that, well, doing what she's done, it looks like she's made a decision to bring about the prohibited consequence, which is theft, because of her efforts in stealing it. So there's your first bit of AO2 for the first scenario. You've sort of suggested with some thought that it appears to demonstrate the actus reus, and also it looks like we've got the mens rea. So the conclusion there, and there ought to be a tiny little reference to a conclusion, this could well be attempted theft on this first occasion. And then you can move on and do the next bit of your AO2. So you're recycling the AO2 now. You've done the AO1. You don't need to add any law unless you forgot something and want to sort of squeeze it into when you do apply it. You can do that. But we've pretty much set the standard of the law in the AO1, and we're now applying to it. And here's our second scenario. It's this bit up here where she returns later that same day. In other words, she's going to have another go at stealing this painting. And I've done something slightly different here. I've started, because let's face it, when you look at this bit here, this green scenario, the second attempt, you look at it and you think, oh dear, she doesn't get very far in her attempt to steal this one, so it's pretty much going to be a no, and you get a gut feeling for what your conclusion is going to be. And you look at that and you think, well, there's pretty much no chance of her doing the actus reus here. She just doesn't get anywhere near enough, does she? So one thing you can do is start with any positives. And that is the mens rea. And so I'm actually starting with the mens rea here, which is a bit unusual, but you can see why. I'm starting with the positive. And I'm saying, well, actually, on the second attempt, she perhaps does have the mens rea because she appears very intent on stealing this painting. And it's clearly what she intends to do. And we've already explained Mohan, but we're making another inference to it there. So then we can move on and do the however. In other words, well, it started on a positive, but I'm going to be a bit more doubtful now. And it's the actus reus, isn't it? Because she doesn't get anywhere near the painting. She doesn't even enter the building. So it's pretty clear cut that she hasn't done an act more than preparatory. I mean, if in the previous scenario, grabbing it was just about more than preparatory, this second scenario is going to be a definite no, isn't it? So I've gone the Campbell route and say, well, this is not more than preparatory. It's pretty clear this is going to fail. And that was quite quick. Not always, but quite often it's the first bit that takes most of the time, and the other couple of occasions you're just sort of relating to. It's going to be something different. It's going to go in a different direction. There might be different elements of law to apply. And again, on the third occasion, I've started with the positive. Again, it looks very intentional, looks very deliberate, the way she has this desperation by now, if you like, and determination to steal this painting. Trying a third time. So I'll start with a general, well, her objectives appear to show that she's intending to steal it. And also on this one, and you might think, oh, okay, well, perhaps this is going to be successful. She actually takes it, doesn't she, on this third occasion? She does do an act more than in preparation. She does, beyond embark on the crime proper, throwing in a bit of case law references. So at this point, you're thinking, well, looks like she's got the mens rea, and it looks like she's achieved the actus reus. But there's a problem, isn't there? The painting that she steals isn't the one she wants. It's a copy of the original. So she's actually not stealing might look like it, but she's not stealing the particular painting that she wants. So there's our problem in this third scenario. So again, I've started with a couple of positives and said, well, that looks okay and that looks okay. But then you're going to roll out the however and say, well, she doesn't steal the painting that she wants. It's been switched. And then you ought to go on and say, well, what is the problem there? And what is the legal solution? Does it matter? And the conclusion is, well, actually, it doesn't matter that the painting she wanted, or the thing she wanted to steal, or whatever crime it is she wanted to commit, doesn't actually achieve her objectives, because we've got this impossibility situation that you mentioned briefly in your AO1. It was another thing you ideally will have learnt, and you're now applying it. It might be impossible to have stolen the painting that she specifically wanted, but it's not impossible to do the crime of theft, and that's what she's being accused of, attempted theft. And that's that Shiv Puri case, and section 1 subsection 2, which again you might have mentioned in your AO1. We're now saying, the key to this third scenario is the issue of impossibility, and that's going to make the difference to allow us to say, well, technically, yes, you can still be guilty, because although it was impossible to steal the painting, she still attempted, in fact did, steal this painting. The fact it wasn't the one she wanted won't make her not guilty of attempted theft. She can still be guilty. Okay, well, I hope that helps. If I can just go back and demonstrate the fact that we can have all of these elements. You could have done the bit by bit approach here. I just think it can get a little bit more confusing when you're doing the same crime several times over. I think it's easier to just blast off your AO1 and then just apply to it several times. Okay, thanks for listening. Hope that helps you.